That morning, sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, falling onto the wooden dining table, faded from 40 years of marriage. Clara placed the hot coffee cup in front of her husband. She was familiar with every little movement, so much so that she didn't need to think. 2 spoons of sugar, a thin stream of milk, never changing. Henry looked up, his eyes etched with fatigue. He looked at her for a long time, as if weighing something heavy. And then the words fell, neat and cruel. "I regret marrying you." There was no clatter of cups, no screams or sobs, just a long, suffocating silence. Clara blinked slowly. In that moment, she realized her heart didn't break because it had quietly died a long time ago. She stood up. No arguments, no questions. Just silently walked upstairs. In the bedroom that had witnessed so many years, Clara opened the wardrobe, pulled out the old suitcase. She folded each piece of clothing, placing it inside, gently, as if packing up her entire life. On the dressing table, the brown leather-bound diary still lay there, thick with pages of writing. She placed it in the middle of the table like a final word. It wasn't just words. It was the witness to 40 years of silence, of a woman who had sacrificed herself to be a wife, a mother, then turned into a shadow in her own home. She pulled the suitcase down the stairs. Henry still sat motionless, his hands clasped around the now cold coffee cup. Clara walked past him without a word. The door closed behind her, making a dry sound, like a full stop to a marriage that had seemed unchanging. The morning street was chilly. Clara took a deep breath. For the first time in 40 years, she left the house not to go to the market, not to care for someone else, but to find herself again. The diary she left on the old wooden table in the bedroom was the reason. The yellowed pages, thickened over the years, held every sigh, every tear Clara had held back for 40 years. No one knew that in this seemingly peaceful house, a woman was quietly documenting the slow death of her own heart. Clara started writing when she was young. The first page opened with trembling handwriting. "Today I married Henry. I believe I have chosen a dependable man." It was the belief of a girl in her early 20s who had just left her beloved job as a librarian to dedicate herself to her home. Back then, Clara believed love was safety, stability, a strong shoulder to lean on. Henry wasn't romantic. He didn't give flowers, didn't write love letters. But he was punctual, always paid the bills on time, and never let Clara worry about material needs. The young girl thought, stability means devotion. And she signed the marriage contract, not with paper, but with her own youth. The first pages of the diary were full of faith. Clara wrote about Henry's laughter when they bought their first house, about his strong arms holding their daughter Amelia at birth, about the pride when Lucas, their son, took his first steps on the living room carpet. But then, those bright lines faded, replaced by short, heavy sentences, as if Clara only wrote to remind herself she still existed. "Henry came home late today. I reheated dinner 3 times. He doesn't look me in the eye when he talks, just glances past, as if I were a shadow. Amelia asked why Mommy is always worried. I smiled, but my heart was breaking." Clara didn't write to blame. She wrote so she wouldn't forget she once had feelings. The diary was her only friend, one that didn't interrupt, didn't belittle, didn't mock. It listened to everything, from the fear when Henry scoffed at something she said, to the hurt when her children gradually learned from their father, casually disrespecting their mother's clumsiness. In one anniversary entry, Clara recounted their 25th anniversary party. Friends raised their glasses. Henry laughed loudly. 25 years is too long to put up with anyone." Everyone roared with laughter. Only Clara was silent. She wrote, "He was telling the truth, and no one realized I had just heard my life sentence." Each page of the diary was like a cut, not a deep, bleeding wound, but a small nick, repeated over and over until the heart was exhausted. Clara called her marriage a silent machine, a machine that still ran, still had enough oil to function, but had lost its soul. Love was gone, replaced by habit, duty, and empty conversations. She wrote, "We no longer talk, we exchange information. No more embraces, only brushing past. I am no longer a wife nor a lover. I am just a cog in the wheel." The diary also recorded the moments Clara wanted to escape. Once she wrote, "If I left, would anyone notice? Would Henry see the empty chair, or would he just see it as a spare seat?" But then, like so many other women, she reassured herself with duty. The children needed both parents, the house needed tending, and she sewed her own wounds shut again. The last diary entry before she left recorded the family dinner, where Amelia and Lucas casually laughed at the cake she had painstakingly made. Clara didn't write much, just one line. "They laughed, and I disappeared." The diary, filled with such suppressed words, was the testimony of a silent life. It didn't just tell what happened. It exposed the enormous gap between two people living under the same roof. A gap that Clara herself no longer had the strength to bridge. When she walked out the door that morning, Clara knew Henry would find the diary. She wanted him to read it. She wanted, just once, after 40 years, for him to truly see her, not as the subservient wife, not as the silent homemaker, but as a person who had endured until she had nothing left to lose. That endurance hadn't been worn down by a major shock. People often think marriages break because of a huge betrayal, a violent argument. But for Clara, there was nothing loud. Instead, her heart was gradually eroded by small cuts, words that seemed harmless, frowns that seemed accidental, repeated over decades. And those were what killed her from the inside. Clara remembered their 25th wedding anniversary clearly. The room was filled with warm light, friends raising glasses, cheerful laughter. Henry, his face flushed with wine, raised his glass and joked, "25 years. That's too long a time to put up with anyone." Everyone burst out laughing. Someone even clapped Henry on the back, approvingly. Clara smiled too, a smile as thin as a crack in a mirror, trying to hide the sting in her heart. But that night, she quietly opened her diary and wrote, "He told the truth, and no one in that room realized it." That was the first cut Clara remembered clearly. Then came the everyday life. Henry had a habit of interrupting his wife. When Clara tried to tell a small story about her garden, he would cut in, "It's a trivial thing. You worry too much." When she shared concerns about their son Lucas's health, he waved his hand. Don't always make things sound so serious. Gradually, Clara became the professional worrier in the eyes of her friends and family. She was no longer listened to, just categorized, like an annoying habit. Once during a party, her daughter Amelia giggled and said, "Mom always overreacts." Henry added, "Just like her, always has been." The table laughed. Clara sat silently, looking down at the plate in her hands, wondering, when did I become the joke? Those cuts didn't draw blood immediately. They festered, repeated, eroded. Clara called it the invisible erosion. By day, she was busy cooking, cleaning, running errands for every meal. At night, when the house was quiet, she sat under the dim lamp, writing in her diary. I want to speak, but no one listens. I want to cry, but no one sees. I want to disappear, but it seems no one would even notice. Then came the fateful night of the family dinner. Lucas and Amelia came home to visit. Clara spent the whole day preparing, from the hot soup to the elaborate cake. In her heart, perhaps a tiny part of her hoped that a mother's love could create the warmth that had been missing for so long. But when the cake was brought out, Lucas frowned. "Mom, you still remember that birthday cake, right? You forgot the sugar. We thought we were chewing sand." Amelia burst out laughing. "Oh my God, yes. Mom, you always do these funny things. Good thing there's sugar today, otherwise." Henry shook his head, chewed a piece, then added half-jokingly, "Dry as a desert." The whole table erupted in laughter. Amid the laughter, Clara saw herself disappear. Not physically leaving the room, but disappearing as a person, leaving only a function: to cook, to worry, to endure. A mother to be teased, a wife to carry the load, a shadow, nothing more. That night, Clara wrote in her diary, "Who am I in this house? An unpaid servant? A supporting actress for ridicule? Or simply a name that will fade when I vanish?" Those small cuts, from a joke, a frown, a laugh, accumulated, deeper than any wound. The final straw was that dinner, the one where Clara got up very early. She opened the fridge, took out every ingredient she had prepared the day before. Her hands moved with practiced ease, washing vegetables, seasoning, turning on the oven. She wanted this dinner to be perfect, a complete family moment when Amelia and Lucas came home. In Clara's heart, a fragile belief remained. Maybe if the family just sat down, shared a warm meal, the vague distance that had grown between them could be erased. It was the last hope she held for this family. The smell of chicken soup filled the kitchen. The sound of the knife on the cutting board, the spoon hitting the pot, mixed with Clara's quickening heartbeat. She wiped her hands on her apron, checked herself in the mirror. Her face had more wrinkles, but her eyes still shined with anticipation. In the evening, the table was fully laid: hot soup, roasted meat, fresh salad, and in the center, the cake she had meticulously baked all afternoon. Clara took a deep breath, telling herself, "If only they can feel it, just a little." The doorbell rang. Amelia entered, carrying a gift bag. Lucas followed, giving his mother a perfunctory hug. Henry stood on the porch, shaking his son's hand, then patting his daughter's shoulder. No one noticed Clara's hand trembling slightly as she poured the wine. The meal began. The table was lively with conversation, mostly about Lucas's work, Amelia's business trips. Clara sat listening, smiling, trying to chime in with small questions. "Is your company doing okay? Are you eating well?" But every time she spoke, the answer was usually a short, "Yes, Mom," or "Yeah, it's fine." Then the conversation would drift to another topic, leaving her with a strained smile. When the cake was brought out, Clara watched anxiously. She placed it in the center of the table, like a small gift to her family. Lucas looked at the cake, then suddenly laughed. "Mom, you still remember that birthday cake incident, right? You forgot the sugar. We ate it thinking it was sand." Amelia giggled. "Oh my gosh, that's right. I remember it clearly. Mom always has these funny moments." Henry cut a piece, chewed a few times, then dropped a half-joking comment. "Dry as a desert." Laughter erupted. The table was roaring. In that laughter, Clara sat silent. The small knife in her hand froze. She bit her lip, trying to hold her smile, but her heart tightened. She felt she was no longer a cherished mother, no longer a loved wife. She was just a joke. She looked at Henry. He didn't notice her gaze. He was laughing with his children, proud that he had just created a fun atmosphere. Amelia and Lucas also didn't notice their mother's face slowly turning pale. In that moment, Clara suddenly remembered all the times she had been interrupted, dismissed, left out of conversations. It all came flooding back, culminating in a terrible echo in her head. I am just a function, a shadow. She didn't cry. She just sat there, silent, as if her soul had separated from her body. The clinking of cutlery, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all passed by like a distant dream. That night, when everyone was asleep, Clara opened her diary. She wrote only one line. They laughed, and I disappeared. A simple line, but it was a verdict. It wasn't just a dinner. It was the eulogy for her 40 years of silent wifehood and motherhood. And so, when the heavy wooden door closed behind Clara the next morning, making a dry click, it was the end. She stood still for a few seconds on the porch, her hand still trembling slightly, the worn suitcase in her hand a testament to her irreversible decision. The early morning street was quiet, wind rustling through the trees, carrying a feeling that was both strange and liberating. The first step out of the old house was not easy. Clara wasn't just leaving the roof, the walls, and the familiar rooms. She was leaving a lifetime of habits, a lifetime of playing a role. The role of a silent wife, a worrying mother, a shadow no one saw. The taxi was waiting at the gate. Clara got into the back seat, quietly whispering the address of her best friend, Margot. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seemed about to start a conversation, but seeing her distant gaze, he fell silent. The car moved, leaving behind a house that shrank in the mirror. Clara closed her eyes, took a deep breath. In her chest, a vast emptiness was opening up. It was painful, but also a relief. Margot welcomed her with open arms. You finally did it, she said, her voice warm and deep. Clara fell onto her friend's shoulder, sobbing for the first time after years of holding back. The tears flowed, no longer of humiliation, but like rain washing away decades of accumulated dust. The first few days at Margot's were empty. Clara wandered through the spacious living room, listening to the clock tick, feeling like a leaf fallen from a branch, unsure where it would drift. She slept a lot, and when she woke, she would sit silently by the window. Many times, Clara wondered, did I do the right thing? If I go back, at least I have a roof. But then she remembered Henry's eyes, the words like a knife that morning, and the roaring laughter at the family dinner. That memory kept her firm. Going back meant returning to the abyss that had swallowed her. Margot patiently gave Clara time. One morning, her friend placed a hot cup of tea in front of Clara and said, You've lived for others for 40 years. It's time to live for yourself. That simple sentence was like a spark lighting up a dark corner. Clara started trying small things. She took walks in the nearby park, watching children play, listening to the birds sing, sounds she hadn't noticed in a long time. She bought a new pair of shoes, not practical shoes for cooking or shopping, but simply because they made her feel a few years younger. She stood in front of the mirror, surprised to see that the face in the mirror could still smile, even if the smile was still clumsy. One afternoon, Margot dragged Clara along to a small art center in town. They offered watercolor classes for seniors. Clara waved her hand dismissively. I don't know anything about painting. But Margot just shrugged. You don't need to know. You just need to let the colors run wild for once in your life. Clara sat down, picked up the brush, her hand trembling. She dipped it in water, swiped a line of blue on the paper. The color spread, soft as a summer river. In that moment, she felt her heart skip a beat. It had been so long since Clara had felt such simple freedom, not to please anyone, not to be perfect, just to let herself breathe. As days passed, the room at Margot's was no longer a temporary shelter, but a place where Clara began to revive. She noted small things. Today I saw a flower bloom by the lake. I smiled when I saw a messy paint splotch on my painting. These seemingly trivial things were proof to Clara that she was still alive, still capable of joy. One evening, while writing in her diary, Clara looked up and suddenly smiled. The thick notebook, once filled with pain, now had a new page with only one line. Today I walked out of the old house, and I will never go back. That line wasn't just a declaration, it was a beginning. Clara realized leaving wasn't running away, it was to find herself. The woman who had been asleep for 40 years, just now opening her eyes to see life in new colors. While Clara began her journey of revival, back in the old house, the silence she left behind began to speak. The house was unusually quiet after Clara left. Henry sat in the living room, light filtering through the heavy curtains, casting a pale gray color on his face. The morning coffee cup was still on the table, cold. At first he thought Clara would come back. Maybe she was just upset, wanted to get away for a while. But as the days went by, the house remained silent. The kitchen no longer smelled of hot soup. The living room no longer had the sound of a bustling woman. Only then did Henry begin to realize the void she left was enormous. One rainy afternoon, Henry went up to the bedroom. On the dressing table, among the familiar items, he saw the brown leather-bound notebook. It lay there, thick, as if intentionally waiting for him to open it. Henry hesitated. A part of him knew this was his wife's privacy, but curiosity, or rather, a growing unease, pushed him to open the book. From the very first pages, Henry's eyes wavered. Today I married Henry. I believe I have chosen a dependable man. He froze. That simple sentence made him feel as if his chest was being squeezed. He turned the page. On the next page, Clara's handwriting gradually shifted from eager to bitter. He doesn't give flowers, doesn't write love letters, but I believe stability means devotion. I left my job at the library to take care of the family. It was a necessary sacrifice, Henry remembered. It was true. Clara had loved that job. He had promised to let her go back after the children were born, but the promise faded into oblivion. The following pages were filled with heavier and heavier handwriting. I reheated dinner 3 times. He doesn't look me in the eye when he talks. My daughter asked why Mommy is always worried. I smiled, but my heart was breaking. Henry put the diary down, trembling. He remembered those moments. He had laughed, waved her concerns away, treating his wife's worries as trivial quirks. But on paper, the things he thought were small appeared as knife cuts, slashing into her heart. The middle of the diary recounted their 25th anniversary. Everyone laughed when he said, 25 years is too long to put up with anyone. I laughed too, but that was the first time I heard my life sentence. Henry read this, his fingers trembling, unable to turn the page. He remembered that party, the loud laughter, his wife's strained smile and empty eyes. He hadn't seen anything. The last page was the fateful family dinner. I made the cake with all my hope. They laughed, and I disappeared. Just one line, but it was like the final blow. Henry closed the diary, clutching his head. His mind echoed with the laughter from that day, his children's words, his own teasing comment. They crashed and swirled like a self-inflicted wound. For the first time in his life, Henry realized he had never truly seen his wife. For 40 years, he had only seen ready meals, a tidy house, annoying reminders. But he had never seen a person with a heart that longed for love, a woman waiting to be heard. Henry sat stunned all night. The diary lay before him like an accusation without a trial. He wanted to run and find Clara immediately, but he was afraid. Afraid of the look in her eyes, afraid of the silence that had now become an impassable boundary. That night, Henry took out a pen and paper. Words he had never written in his life began to appear. He apologized, not just for the morning's words, but for 40 years of not understanding. He confessed that the stability he thought was love was actually just careless habit. And he decided, the assets, the house, everything, let Clara choose. Because for the first time, Henry realized, the important thing wasn't to keep a house, but to restore some dignity to the woman whose life he had missed. The diary had done what 40 years of marriage could not. It forced Henry to see the truth. That truth was painful, and it forced him to act. As evening fell, Henry sat silently at his desk in the empty room. In front of him, the diary was closed, but every word still burned in his mind. All these years, he had never realized how lonely his wife was. 40 years of living together, and he had let that woman slowly fade into silence. The pen trembled in Henry's hand. The hands that had signed hundreds of contracts, that held all the numbers firmly, now struggled to write an apology. But he wrote, word by word, line by line, as if unloading a burden. Clara, I am sorry. I lived beside you without ever truly seeing you. I took your silence as acceptance, stability as love, and your devotion as a given. I was wrong. If I could go back, I would choose to listen instead of interrupt, to hold your hand instead of waving it away. Now, all I can do is give you everything that belongs to us, the house, the assets, as compensation, though I know nothing can erase the 40 years you've endured. I am not asking you to come back. I only hope you find freedom to live the life you deserve. A tear fell onto the page. Henry couldn't remember the last time he cried. Maybe decades ago, when his father died. But today, he cried for the marriage he had destroyed. The letter was sent the next morning. But Henry didn't stop there. He called Lucas and Amelia. The two children walked into the living room, finding their father sitting grimly, his face gaunt. Henry placed the diary in front of them. "Read it," he said, his voice hoarse. Lucas frowned. Amelia hesitated. But then they both opened the first page. A few minutes later, the room sank into a heavy silence. Amelia dropped the diary, her eyes red. "Mom? Mom wrote all this?" Lucas was trembling, his voice cracking. "I never thought." She felt so small. Henry clenched his fists, confessing, "I didn't either. I was blind. We were all blind." They turned to the part about the family dinner, the short line. They laughed, and I disappeared. Amelia burst into sobs. She remembered that moment clearly when the whole family laughed at the cake. She had no idea her laughter was a knife stabbing straight into her mother. Lucas silently picked up his phone, dialing his mother's number. His hand shook violently. When the other end picked up, Clara's voice came through, gentle but distant. "Hello? Mom," Lucas choked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was so thoughtless. I always thought you were fine, that you were strong. But it turns out you were in pain all these years, and I never saw it." Amelia also broke in. "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have laughed at you, shouldn't have dismissed your worries. I love you, and I'm too late to say this." The other end was silent for a moment. Then Clara sighed softly. "My children, I don't blame you. I'm just sad that I disappeared in everyone's eyes for so long. Now, I want to live for myself. Please understand." Tears streamed down Lucas's and Amelia's faces. They had never heard their mother speak with such a firm yet calm voice. When the call ended, Henry sat silently. He didn't pick up the phone, didn't interject. He knew he no longer had the right to ask anything of Clara. That night, in the large house, Henry reread his own apology letter alone. He didn't expect forgiveness. He only hoped that one day Clara would read it and believe that at least, finally, he had seen her. And elsewhere, in a small room at Margot's, Clara sat in a chair by the window, holding the letter Henry had sent. She read every line, tears rolling down, but they were no longer bitter. She cried, not for the pain, but for the validation. Finally, after 40 years, her silence had been heard. She folded the letter, placed it in a wooden box. Clara smiled faintly, thinking, "An apology may be late, but at least it exists. And I will never go back because I have started on my own path." The apologies had been spoken, but the final decision still rested with Clara. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the small room where she sat. On the wooden table, Henry's letter lay next to a steaming cup of tea. She had read it many times. Each time, she felt a reverse current in her heart, part sorrow, part tenderness, part release. In the letter, Henry confessed his faults over 40 years, willingly offering her the house and assets, wishing her the life she deserved. Clara knew he was truly regretful. She believed the sincerity in his trembling handwriting, and the tearful, apologetic calls from her children had also touched her, stirring old wounds, but also sparking a little warmth she thought had died. But Clara understood one thing. An apology, however late, could not mend 40 lost years. She could forgive, but she could not return. To return was to step back into the shadows, into the silence, into the house where she had disappeared. Clara made another cup of tea, sat down at the table, and wrote a reply to Henry. "Henry, I received your letter. Thank you for writing the words I waited 40 years to hear. I believe you are sorry, and I forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean returning. I have found myself after leaving the old house, and I cannot give that up. Let us consider this the end of one life together, so we can each start a new chapter. I wish you peace." She folded the letter, sighed, but her heart felt lighter than ever. A few days later, a lawyer delivered all the transfer documents from Henry. She held the stack of papers, feeling as if a great weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't the money, but the recognition she craved. She was no longer the shadow in that house. She was a person who had been seen, acknowledged, and set free. Clara decided to sell the old house. On the day of the signing, she went there one last time. The house was empty, her footsteps echoing. She walked through the living room, remembering so many cold dinners. She stood in the kitchen, which once held the smell of soup, cake, and also ridicule. She went up to the bedroom where she had written tear-stained diary entries. Before leaving, Clara placed her hand on the wall, whispering, "Thank you for teaching me the most important lesson. Never disappear in your own life." She signed the papers and walked out without looking back. With the money from the house, Clara moved to a small cottage by a lake, a cottage an aunt had left her years ago. It was modest, with a moss-covered red tile roof and windows facing the vast water. The first time she walked in, Clara took a deep breath. No clatter of dishes, no interruptions, no mocking laughter, just the wind, the water, and true silence. She began setting up a small art studio in the bright room next to the window. White canvases, pots of watercolors, brushes resting neatly in a wooden jar. The first day, Clara painted a simple scene, the lake at sunset. The painting wasn't beautiful, but in every brushstroke, she felt herself truly breathing. Soon, the children from the village found their way to her. At first, just a few curious kids peered through the window, watching her paint. Clara smiled, invited them in, let them try holding a brush. Giggles filled the room, mixing with the soft scent of watercolor. The small art class became a weekly habit. Clara taught the children not just how to paint, but how to see the beauty in simple things. A dewdrop on a leaf, a shadow on the wall, a ripple on the lake. In this simple joy, Clara realized, she didn't leave to be alone. She left to be whole. She no longer needed a diary to write her pain, because now her life was a colorful page. One evening, Lucas and Amelia came to visit. They walked into the studio, saw their mother laughing with the children. Amelia burst into tears, hugging her mother tightly. "I've never seen you this happy," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I promise I will never take you for granted again. I want to see you like this forever." Clara wiped her children's tears, speaking gently. "You don't need to promise anything. Just live truly. Don't disappear as I did. That is enough." That night, sitting alone by the lake, Clara looked up at the starry sky. She smiled softly. No more resentment, no more fear. Just a deep peace in her chest. And for the first time in 40 years, Clara whispered to herself, "I chose me, and this time, I am truly living." The path she chose led to a place of true peace. The morning lake was as still as a mirror. The first rays of sun sparkled on the water, painting a shimmering picture Clara had never taken the time to notice in her old life. She stood on the porch of her small cottage, holding a hot cup of tea, quietly taking a deep breath. No more suffocating tension of stressful dinners, no more clinking spoons mixed with mockery. Just the chirping of birds and the damp, earthy smell of grass. In the room by the window, Clara's small art studio took shape. On the walls hung her first few paintings, rough but full of life. The blue of the lake, the yellow of the sun, the vibrant red of wildflowers by the road. On the easel, a painting was in progress. The silhouette of a woman sitting on a porch, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes looking into the distance, but her mouth smiling. Clara knew it was herself, the version she had lost, now returning. Day by day, more children from the village came. At first, they just peeked in curiously, but gradually, they asked to learn. Clara didn't refuse. She bought more paper, more paints, and set up a few more small chairs. The studio turned into a classroom filled with laughter. "Miss Clara, I can't draw a round sun," a little boy exclaimed. "That's okay. Clara smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. The sun doesn't have to be round, it just has to shine. Just like you. You don't have to be like anyone else. You just have to be yourself. The words made the children giggle, but in Clara's heart, they resonated as a reminder to herself. Every afternoon, after the children left, Clara would clean the studio, looking at the naive drawings hanging everywhere, her heart filled with an unnameable happiness. It turned out happiness didn't need to be found in sweet words or grand celebrations. Sometimes, happiness was just the sound of a brush on paper, the paint stains on her sleeve, the innocent smile of a child finishing their first painting. One evening, Amelia and Lucas dropped by. They stood amazed at the studio entrance. Amelia reached out to touch a landscape painting. "Mom, I never knew you could paint so beautifully." Clara laughed. "I never thought I could either. But when you start to let yourself try, you'll be surprised at what you can do." Lucas sat down on a wooden stool, watching his mother intently. "Mom, I'm sorry again, but this time, not for the past. I'm sorry I wasn't here to see you happy sooner." Clara placed a hand on her son's shoulder, shaking her head gently. "No more apologies. The important thing is that now we truly see each other." That night, the three of them sat by the lake, sharing things they had never said in all these years. Clara talked about her youthful dream, wanting to open a small bookstore or an art class for children. Amelia talked about the pressures of her job. Lucas confessed the times he saw his mother worry, but just ignored it, afraid to face real emotions. All three listened to each other. No one interrupted. No one mocked. And for Clara, this was the complete family dinner she had waited 40 years for. Since opening the studio, Clara rarely wrote in her diary. Not because she didn't want to remember, but because she was living in every moment, no longer needing pages to hold her. She realized when a woman starts to choose herself, she no longer needs a witness for her pain, because her present joy is the clearest testament. One autumn morning, the wind rustled through the trees by the lake. Clara opened the window, breathing in the scent of dry leaves and oil paint. On the table was a painting she had just finished, the lake at sunset, but in the foreground stood a woman, her back straight, holding a brush, her eyes fixed on the setting sun. She hung it on the wall, smiling. Clara knew she had been reborn. She didn't need Henry's validation, her children's regret, or anyone else to prove she was worthy. Because finally, she had proven it to herself. As evening approached, Clara sat on her wooden chair on the porch, watching the children run laughing around the yard, their voices carrying on the wind. She sipped her tea, whispering softly, "I didn't leave to be alone. I left to be whole." That was the final truth, and also the new beginning of her life. Sunset painted the lake, the last rays of the day stretching into a shimmering golden ribbon. Clara sat on the wooden chair on her porch, a thin shawl draped over her shoulders. She no longer held the thick diary. She just held a hot cup of tea, quietly watching the water turn a fiery red. It had been a long time since Clara had written a single line. Before, the diary was the only place she could entrust her pain, a silent friend that recorded every tear. But now, she didn't need it. Her life had become an open diary, written in colors, laughter, and a peace she once thought she could never touch. In the small studio, paintings covered the walls. No longer the trembling strokes of the first day. Now every painting carried the breath of life, children playing by the lake, a cluster of vibrant purple wildflowers, or a pair of aged but steady hands holding a brush. Clara no longer painted to prove anything. She painted for the joy of living. That afternoon, Amelia and Lucas arrived. They sat around the patio table sharing a simple dinner with her: stewed vegetables, toasted bread, a small bottle of wine. No one scoffed, no one interrupted. Only sincere stories, warm laughter, and eyes that truly saw one another. Clara knew this was the family she had been waiting for. Not a perfect family, but a family that knew how to listen. After dinner, Amelia helped her clear the table, while Lucas sat on the porch, watching her quietly. He spoke softly. "I still feel regret. Regret for all the years you endured." Clara smiled, her gaze calm. "Don't regret it anymore, son. I used to regret, to hate, to resent. But without those years, I wouldn't have learned the biggest lesson of my life. Don't let yourself disappear in your own life. And today, I have returned to myself." Amelia wrapped her arms around her mother from behind, whispering, "Mom, I'm so proud of you." Clara gently squeezed her daughter's hand. In that moment, she knew every wound, every late apology, every wrong turn. All of it had led them here, where the three of them could sit together, look directly at each other, and truly see one another. When Amelia and Lucas left, night had fallen. Clara lit a small candle on her painting table. She sat there, holding a brush, but painting nothing. She just sat in silence, letting the flame dance in her eyes. A sentence echoed in her mind, clear and decisive. "I didn't leave to be alone. I left to be whole." That sentence seemed to close a long journey. Clara no longer needed Henry's approval, no longer needed anyone's pity. She had forgiven, not just her husband and children, but herself. Forgiven the young girl who had chosen wrong, sacrificed too much, and stayed silent for too long. Forgiven to be free. The next day, Clara decided to do one last thing. She brought the old diary out to the porch. She didn't tear it, nor did she burn it. She placed it in a wooden box and buried it under the tree by the lake. She whispered, "Thank you for holding my voice when no one else would listen. But I don't need you anymore." The earth was filled in. Clara stood up, dusted off her hands, and felt weightless. In the afternoon, she opened her art class as usual. The children ran in, chirping like little birds. A little girl pressed a new drawing into her hand. A woman with silver hair sitting by a lake, a bright sun shining behind her. Clara smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's beautiful. This is the light you saw." The class erupted in laughter. Clara looked at them, at their innocent faces, then out at the lake. The afternoon sun reflected on the water, so bright it was dazzling. She knew this was the life she had chosen, and the life she deserved. Late that night, Clara sat again in her familiar wooden chair. The night sky was full of stars. She sipped her tea, closed her eyes, letting the night breeze blow through her hair. There was nothing left to write, nothing left to prove, only a simple truth. She had chosen herself, and this time, she was truly living.